Hi, I'm the Baron, or Eric Saturn, and I've had a few requests about the Archer's Paradox. Now, some people get this confused with a few other things. The Archer's Paradox is essentially the aspect of how the arrow flies, or correction, comes out of a bow and then flies towards the target. Some people think that it is the angle specifically on a bow where the arrow comes out. It's not. That has some aspect, but it has more to do with aiming than anything else. So the Archer's Paradox is indicating that once a arrow is released, what happens is that there is flex. Now I'm going to use two terms, flex and porpoising. Flexing is going left to right. Porpoising is going up and down. Okay, so I'll add one thing here first. The thing that comes into play when everyone thinks about it is when there's a normal bow, i.e., a horn bow or a long bow that has a full guard. So therefore, it doesn't have a cut-in shelf. Okay, so therefore, what that means is that when the arrow's on the bow, the arrow is in line with the string. Okay, so when the string releases, it goes straight forward and the arrow goes straight forward. That's what the shelf allows. Now, when you have one that does not have a shelf, what happens is that once you knock an arrow, okay, you're going to see that the arrow, if you go straight, line up the bow and the string together, the arrow is pointing off to the left. And as you can see, when it's not drawn, it's actually at its most deviated point. When you bring it back, it's going to be less because now the distance from here to here allows for the point to actually come in a little bit. It's still not going to be in line, but it is going to come closer to the center of the target. So people are like, okay, so what that means is that when you pull back and you release, the Archer's Paradox is indicating that because an object that's at rest wants to stay in rest, once the string goes forward, it's going to twist, and I'm going to change the angle. So if you were looking straight down from the top of the bow to from the top of the bow to the bottom of the bow, once this thing goes, what happens is that right here, this wants to stay at rest and this wants to move forward because of the string. So what happens is that it starts to go like this because this part still wants to stay stationary and this is being pushed forward. So you're going to start a flex. Once that happens, now all of a sudden the additional kinetic energy from the string and from the tension or the spine of the arrow now starts it to go release. Once that happens, then the energy goes back to normal and then it actually starts to deviate again. Because at that point, it wants to counter correct all the energy that's in there, okay? So if you get an arrow that has a very light spine, that thing can go and deviate drastically. If you got a very rigid spine, it might only deviate this much compared to 4 inches. So inch and a half to 4 inches can be a huge deviation. So once that comes out, you're going to see the arrow doing this, okay? That is essentially the Archer's Paradox because everything wants to try and get back to a normal thing. So the longer the arrow flies, the less bend is going to going to occur. So therefore, if you got a really light spined arrow, you're still going to have a huge deviation. By the time that you hit the target, that center tip of that arrow could be a variant of 1 inch on each side. So your first arrow might be dead center. Your next arrow might be 1 inch to the left or 1 inch to the right. It all depends on how far you are, the poundage of your bow, the amount of flex in your arrow pertaining to the spine. So if you have, this is also why when you get like a 60-pound bow, but you got a really weak spined arrows, sometimes the arrows shatter as they're coming out of the bow, or as soon as they leave, they split in mid-flight because of all that kinetic energy that's going in there, makes it so it becomes unstable. The best way to figure out how to plan or aim with this type of movement, or the archer's paradox, is to remember that there is 2 points on the arrow that is going to stay stationary. Okay, those are the nodes of the arrow. If you can take that line and figure out where that line would pass between the two and position that onto the center part of the target, you're going to get the best result from the archer's paradox. So you're going to have just a small deviation. That's why when I tell anyone to shoot, I say, if you shoot 5 or 6 arrows, what you're trying to do is you're trying to find the 3 arrows that are in a tennis ball sized grouping. That is your target point. So after you shoot your arrows and you're like, okay, I got 4 right here and I was aiming here, then you know you need to adjust. And I always tell everyone to adjust half target form difference, okay? Because people will always overcompensate in little elements like how they're gripping the ball, how they're gripping the bow, where their release point is. Even wind and sun getting into your eyes is going to change different focal points. So correct half forms only, and then keep on shooting. And what you're going to find out is every bow, every set of arrows is going to be a little bit different. So you have to learn to adjust. Now, for a regular bow that has a shelf, now you're still going to get an aspect of the archer's paradox, but you're not going to get as much going side to side, because remember, the string is bringing it straight forward. So there's no twisting or flexing of the arrow. But what you're going to do is you're going to get more of a porpoising effect, because once this starts to release, even though it's straightforward, you're still having more of a resistance or a drag on the bottom part. So that's going to slow it down. And once that does, what you're going to get is the arrow is going to have a slow grip, and it's going to flex like this, and then it's going to go like that. So now you're going to get the same type of thing. Instead of flexing left and right, you're going to have a flex up and down, or a porpoising effect going up and down with the exact same type of thing. So if you shoot a longbow, you might realize that you need to correct more left and right, where if you're using any type of bow that has a shelf, you might realize you have to correct more for an up and down issue. Some people go and do what's known as canting. Canting is where you go and you angle your bow. Now that will change some of the effect, but remember, when you cant, you're now not just trying to fix this or this, you're kind of almost fixing at an angle, like not a straight X, but it's going to have different elements. So if you are good at correcting that way, that's fine, because everyone shoots differently and everyone corrects differently. but don't try and use one form to correct for another. You need to really understand, okay, I got a shelf this time. I now need to be wary that I might be shooting high or low. Okay, oh, can't. That's not going to make it change because you're still having high and low, but it's going to be at an angle now. So you have to realize fixing one way or one form of fixing doesn't always work for different types of bows or different lengths of arrows, different spines or poundage. So you have to have a good understanding and a good way to have multiple ways of adjusting. So as a quick recap, okay, the archer's paradox is not specifically just the angle from a bow that doesn't have a shelf that you have to compensate for. As I said, you're going to realize that, oh, well, I'm going way over here. I need to compensate over here. Well, remember, your arrow is still going to go that way. So if you need to compensate only half distances to try and get a good understanding, because a lot of times people will go and also adjust from each arrow. Don't try and adjust from each arrow. Just shoot, get a grouping, figure out what you need to do, and adjust half forms after that. And find out the best style or form of correction that works best for you and the equipment that you're using. All right, if you have any more questions, please always send me comments. I will do the best that I can to explain them and give you good, hopeful hints. All right, thank you very much.